Hello wine lovers, Trophy Wine Hunter. Welcome back to my wine channel. Today I'm doing another video in my Bordeaux Basics series on the Saint-Emilion region in the right bank. And this is a video that I've procrastinated about for quite a few weeks just because it's so difficult to talk about this topic, and I wanted to make sure that I had something knowledgeable or useful for viewers to view. So before you start, I'm sure you're wondering why Trophy. It's a Bordeaux Basics series. Why do you have a BC wine in front of you? Again, a plug for my other upcoming videos. I just tasted and reviewed this wine, really like it. And if you've watched my channel, you know how harsh I am on BC wineries, but this is one that I actually like. It's the Moraine 2020 Viognier. So please look out for that video, especially if you're BC wine lovers. So let's get back to the topic of Saint-Emilion. So Saint-Emilion is a very large region in the right bank of Bordeaux. And it's actually Saint-Emilion as a town. And it was named after a Benedictine monk called Emilian. And he was the person that created a limestone church, which I believe is quite famous in the Saint-Emilion town. Saint-Emilion is a huge region. It produces a huge amount of wine. The region itself produces as much wine as Listric, Moulis, and all of the left bank major regions, Pauillac, Estephe, Julien, and Margaux combined. So it's a huge, huge region and very diverse in terms of the quality of the wines that are available. So Saint-Emilion is divided from the left bank by the Dordogne River and also the Gironde River. So the soil is really important to the region. Generally speaking, with few exceptions, it grows mostly Merlot grapes are Merlot predominant. And it's their chalky and clay-rich soils that help the growth of Merlot grapes. Because of that soil type and because the soils kind of support cooler climate, it's not as good for Cabernet Sauvignon. So that's why. The two notable exceptions are Cheval Blanc, which has a huge amount of Cabernet Franc, and in particular a strain called Boucher, and then Figeac, which also has quite a bit of Cabernet Sauvignon there, but there are kind of reasons for that. Composition of Saint-Emilion can be divided into a couple of places. The most important is what they call the limestone plateau, and that's where many of the top wineries are. At the top of that is Chateau Pavie, and I was fortunate enough to visit Chateau Pavie. Why limestone is so important is that limestone is quite a porous kind of soil, as this was explained to me at Chateau Pavie, and it really kind of absorbs the moisture. So it's particularly good in dry vintages where you need a little bit more wetness. The Merlot grape does like a little bit more than the Cabernet Sauvignon. So in dry vintages that helps, and likewise in wet vintages, it kind of soaks in the rain, so it's not as wet. So the limestone plateau is really where a lot of the top wineries are, and I guess in general, the higher you are, the better, generally speaking. Okay. Then there is kind of another place that's south of the plateau, and that has a very sandy plain and gentle slopes down to the Dordogne. So that's, generally speaking, not as good a region. You don't have a lot of the top wineries. To the northwest of the limestone plateau is kind of a terrace, and it's the soil there kind of is the same type of soil that you see in Pomerol, and that's where you see wineries like Cheval Blanc and Figeac. So Cheval Blanc and Figeac don't have as much limestone and don't have this elevation, are not on the plateau, but their soil is also unique, and I'm not a geologist, but their soil is still unique in terms of how well it grows, particularly Cabernet Franc for Cheval Blanc and also Merlot for Figeac. And it has something to do with the soil being connected, very similar to Pomerol. And then to the northeast, there's kind of 4 satellite areas that have their own names that kind of have Saint-Emilion with them. Just note that those areas are not part of Saint-Emilion. So Saint-Emilion is like huge. It's a huge region, and they have a classification system. So it was first officially classified in 1954. And the good thing about the system is that it's reclassified periodically. It was reclassified in 1969, 1985, 1996, 2006, 2012, and then just recently this year in 2022. So that's the good part of the classification system. The bad part of it is it's very, very confusing, and I don't think many people understand this. So first of all, you have to understand is Saint-Emilion is a huge region. It's got like 800 producers. So it's very difficult to make generalizations of it. The second thing you have to know is that there's a huge amount of wine that comes out of Saint-Emilion. So almost like 2.4 million cases of wine comes out of Saint-Emilion region. Huge amounts. We're talking, but the funny thing is that with their classification system, there's more Grand Cru classified wines than there are non-classified wines. So that, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense, and I'll kind of explain why that is. But you'd think in any system of quality, you'd have a pyramid. Like the lowest quality should have the most, and then it goes up, just like Burgundy, you know, village wines, then Premier Cru, Grand Cru. It'd be a pyramid. In Saint-Emilion, it's the other way around. You have at the top, you have the Premier, Grand Cru, Classé wines, which I'll explain. Then you have this huge belly of Grand Cru wines, and then you have not classified wines, which are even smaller. So just an example, of the 2.4 million cases of wine that come out of Saint-Emilion, 1.5 million of that is Grand Cru, okay? And the other 900,000 cases is actually declassified wine, which is, or not Grand Cru wines that are just labeled Saint-Emilion. So that's kind of peculiar. So kind of let me explain the system, which is very, very confusing. In Saint-Emilion, Grand Cru doesn't mean the same thing that I think it means to most people. Grand Cru means to me, again, it should be better than the non-classified wines. But there's more Grand Cru wines in Saint-Emilion than there is not Grand Cru. So why is this? Because of the criteria of what you need to be a Grand Cru wine in Saint-Emilion. So you need 4 criteria. One is that the yield is lower than 550 liters per hectare. So that's many wineries can do that. The second is that the weight of harvest must be more than 189 grams of sugar, I guess per pound or whatever. But the exception is for Merlot grapes. So if you grow this, let's say you have, and I guess that's a concentration level, right, of grapes. But if you exclude Merlot grapes from this calculation, and Merlot grapes is the dominant grape, you're basically saying nothing, right? The third is the wine must reach an alcohol level of 11.5%. That's basically every wine in Bordeaux, right? What red wine do you know that is less than 11.5%? And the last one is the only one that really makes any sense, which is it must be stored for 14 months. So basically, any person that is prepared to store their wines for 14 months or age their wines for 14 months, essentially can get Grand Cru status in Saint-Emilion. That's why there's so many, hundreds of wineries have Grand Cru Classé, Grand Cru status in Saint-Emilion. The confusion is, as you go up in level, there's what they call Grand Cru Classé. There's about, I think, with the new classifications, about 60 some odd wineries that are labeled Grand Cru Classé. So that is a step up. That's a quality level. You know, they taste them and they judge these wines every 10 years or whatever, and they're labeled Grand Cru Classé. But that's a very subtle distinction for most consumers to look at. Like, how would I look at the bottle? I see Grand Cru and then I see Grand Cru Classé. How am I supposed to know one is basically anyone can get and one is really a quality level? So again, in Saint-Emilion, and again, every region in France is a little bit different, but in Saint-Emilion, it has to say Grand Cru Classé. That makes them one of the top, let's say 80 wines in Saint-Emilion. If it just says Grand Cru, that's basically more than half the wines in Saint-Emilion. So that means really nothing in Saint-Emilion. Next step up is what they call Premier Grand Cru. And of those Premier Grand Cru, there's two classes. Class A, which is the top end, and Class B. So we'll talk about the 2022 classification. In 2022, we just had the class reclassification, and there's only two Grand Cru Classé A wines. One of them is Chateau Figeac, and the other one is Chateau Pavie. Then there is 12 Grand Cru Classé B wines, okay? And I'll go through them and my thoughts about them. There's two Beau Séjour wines. There's one called Beau Séjour de Faux-la-Grosse and Beau Séjour Bacall. Sorry, that's here, right here, Beau Séjour Bacall. So they are what they call Grand Cru Classé B. There's quite a difference in price, and I've had both of them together. When you have them side by side, I do think you can tell that Beau Séjour du Faux-la-Grosse is a little bit better. And that shows also in the price. Then there's a wine called Bel Air Mélange, which I don't think I've had, or even I've had, it hasn't been notable. There's Chateau Canon, which I believe is owned by Chanel. And I think that is a winery that you have to look out for the next reclassification in 10 years. But I'll talk about that at the end of this video. There's Canon La Gaffelère, which I really like. There's Pavie Macan, which is hit and miss, which can be good, really good, and can be okay. There's Traplant Mondot. There's Trottevel. There's Larcis Ducasse, which I personally have never thought was that great, but that could be just my own palate. There's Valandrode, which I had, is a garage wine, which I, in the earlier parts of the 2000s and 2010, I thought was really making good strides, but lately has kind of fallen off. There's Clos Forte, and then there's Le Mondot, which I feel the same way about Valandrode. Were basically more like garage wines. It's Stefan von Nieberg's wine, but I don't think has made as many strides recently. So if I had to judge in terms of my personal taste, which I think are really top end wineries of these are all really, really good wineries, let's put it that way. I really, at the top of the list, I put Canon, then I would put Canon La Gaffelère, Tropolo, du Faux-la-Grosse, and then maybe Pavie Macan, and then Beau Séjour Bacall. Those are the ones I like, and then once in a while, hit and miss the other ones. So then there are, to top this off, there's a strange kind of dynamic where there's 4 wineries that have now been so, they think it's so arbitrary, this rating system, that they've taken themselves out of the rating system. These are Ausson, Angelis, Cheval Blanc, and La Gaffelère, not Canon La Gaffelère. So let me give you my thoughts about all these ones. Let's start with La Gaffelère. I'm not sure why they put themselves out of it, because they weren't the top end winery anyways. So to me, it's kind of silly for you to take yourself out of the rating when you're not the top end people. I understand why Cheval Blanc and Ausson took themselves out of the system, because from their perspective, if you go back in time, they were the only wines that had this Grand Cru Classé Premier Grand Cru Classé A rating. And they held that for many years, and it was a really great distinction. I think they were a little bit peeved. I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but I think they were a little bit peeved when Pavie, but in particular Angelis, were also rated the same, because they're saying to themselves, where are these top-end wineries that are compared to, you know, Petrus or any of the top-end first grows? And then you have Angelis, which is more marketing driven. Maybe Pavie, okay, they're top of mountain, I can live with that. They've got some distinctive soil. We're all in the same league. Okay, but Angelis, I think the thinking was, well, these guys are kind of more marketing people. And they were kind of upset about that. You could tell when in the last ranking system in 2012, when Pavie and Angelis came in, I think they were a little bit upset. But what really upset them was in 2022, they announced that for this year's rankings, because they judge different factors, they were going to judge 35% of, you know, the rating based on kind of notoriety or your image. And that really upset Cheval Blanc and Osson. They're like, are you kidding me? Like, why shouldn't it be about the wine and the quality of wine? Why is it about, like, you know, your marketing or how well you're known? So that pissed them off totally, and they said, we're out of here, okay? But along with that, Angelis came with them. So I think Angelis thinks of themselves as in the same level as Osson and Cheval Blanc. So they said, well, if they're leaving, we're leaving. So it's kind of a funny dynamic. And again, I don't have any proof of this, but this is just my own thought in just observing the wineries, and I've visited them, talked to people. But my opinion is basically Cheval Blanc and Osson think of themselves as the top guys. And they said, this system is ridiculous. We don't need this, so we're leaving. And Angelis, as the kind of younger brother, says, oh, if you guys are leaving, then I'm leaving too. And I don't think Cheval Blanc and Osson really wanted that, but that's fine. They can't stop that. So anyways, what's left now is Pavie, which is I think many people believe that is a winery, and Figeac. So Figeac is very similar to Angelis in that it's at the bottom of the slope. So, but what distinguishes Figeac from Angelis is it's got the same fairly similar soil to Cheval Blanc, and it's on the same kind of plane as Cheval Blanc and the Pomerol winery. So you can explain that. And I think people are upset with Figeac being in that category. So now you kind of have a half system, which is very, very confusing, but of course is interesting. So going forward, what is my recommendations? The wineries that I think, because the 2022 rating has just come out, so the reclassification. So they're not going to classify again for another 10 years. So we're kind of stuck with these ratings for 10 years. My kind of suggestion is really focus on the Premier Grand Cru Classé A and Classé B wines, which there's only 14 of them. Those to me are the top end wines. At the Grand Cru Classé level, they are very good wineries, but there's too many. There's 60 of them. It's very hard to differentiate. But the two wineries that personally I would watch out for, which I think are still underpriced, well, three. Chateau Figeac, I think, is still underpriced because people have not priced in that it's an elevated wine. So because it's elevated Grand Cru Classé, Premier Grand Cru Classé A, it should be in the same price range as Pavie and maybe Chateau Angelis. But I don't think it is right now. It's trading at quite a discount, even though it's gone up quite a bit over the last year. I think there's still a little bit of pricing gap that will be covered over the next 3 or 4 years as people realize how good Figeac is and actually kind of get acquainted with it. The other two wineries, one is Chateau Canon. So Chateau Canon, again, they put in a ton of money, the Chanel people. I've been to the winery. It's like immaculate. They're making spectacular wines. They were a little upset they weren't included as a Premier Grand Cru Classé A, but I think it's kind of how things work. They're kind of the new kids. Their winery hasn't, like, I don't think it's been that long since Chanel took it over. So they want them to kind of produce better wines for a little while. And I'm fairly confident in the next reclassification in 10 years that they'll probably be elevated. So that's a winery that I think is underpriced. And most people, I'm not a genius here, most people realize this. So the pricing is starting to creep up on that wine. And in fact, in some jurisdictions, I think is even higher than Figeac. The other wine to really look at is Quintus. So Quintus is the chateau that is owned by the Aubryon family, the Prince of Luxembourg. If you know what his emphasis is to make a very high quality wine, because I just talked to the people at Aubryon and I know that they want to make a wine that rivals Petrus. Quintus is comprised of a winery, but they've also added two great wineries to it. One is Chateau La Rossie, which was a Grand Cru Classé wine, and the other is Grand Pontet, which is another Grand Cru Classé wine. So these are really good vineyards that they've added to Quintus. And Quintus needs some time. They're really starting to rev up, put money into it. And I think you're gonna see over the next couple of years, Quintus is gonna be a spectacular wine. It's not that expensive at this point, but I think you're gonna see over the next 6 or 7 years that price really elevates. So those are the wines that I would really watch in Saint-Emilion. I hope this video has been useful, and I hope you look forward to my next video, which will be one of the stars, a review of one of the stars of the Saint-Emilion region, Chateau Pavie. Hope you've enjoyed this, and until next time, happy drinking.